March 1965, Vietnam. The war was escalating. 1965 sounds distant, but maybe in this context it shouldn't. Because while the way wars are fought may have evolved, the experience of the people who fight them hasn't changed nearly as much as we may think. That March, thousands of US Marines had just arrived in country. It was around this time that a photojournalist named Larry Burrows, who was on assignment from Life magazine, began chronicling the day-to-day experience of US troops in the midst of a rapidly expanding war. On the 31st of March, he was part of what was supposed to be a routine helicopter mission. The kind of mission that even today would be described in briefings as standard or low risk. The record of that day's events turned into one of the most powerful visual stories of war ever captured. This is the story of one ride with Yankee Papa 13, the photo essay by Larry Burrows that didn't just document the war, it laid bare its human cost. At this point in the Vietnam War, the United States had just begun major combat operations. American Marines had recently arrived in Da Nang, and helicopter warfare was becoming the backbone of the conflict. In much the same way as air mobility and rapid deployment still remain central to modern warfare today. These missions looked simple on paper. Fly in, drop troops, fly out. On paper, these operations still look just as clinical and straightforward today, even when using modern helos, tilt rotors or other troop insertion methods, but in reality, they were some of the most dangerous operations of the war. The mission that day was a combat insertion operation, a type of mission that remains the core part of military doctrine to this day. Its objective, transport soldiers from the Army of the Republic of Vietnam into a contested rural area believed to be controlled by the Viet Cong. Supporting them in the air were helicopters from the US Marine Corps Medium Helicopter Squadron 163. Among them, a UH-34 Seahorse helicopter, call sign Yankee Papa 13. These crews were absolutely critical to a successful operation as they were tasked with insertion, fire support, and if things went wrong, emergency evacuation. As the helicopters approached the landing zone, everything seemed quite routine at first, as it so often does, right up until it doesn't. The moment they descended, they were met with heavy machine gun fire. Moments like this still define modern battlefields where plans can collapse in seconds under intense combat conditions. The landing zone wasn't as secure as first thought. YP-13 dropped off its troops under fire and headed back to the pickup point to load up again. It was on their second approach to the landing zone that YP-13's pilot, Captain Peter Vogel, spotted YP-3 on the ground with its engine still running and its rotors turning. He instinctively knew that they were in trouble and was heard to say, "Why aren't they lifting off?" over the intercom. He then set down his ship nearby to investigate and give assistance. In seconds, the mission changed from troop insertion to rescue, a shift that every military still trains for, because when the enemy is engaged, objectives can change instantly. YP-3's gunner, Sergeant Billy Owens, and its co-pilot, Lieutenant James Miguel, ran from the downed aircraft towards YP-13. Farley was watching from the doorway when Captain Vogel ordered him to help the pilot of the stricken aircraft, who was still strapped into his seat. Farley took off with Burrows right behind him. He then climbed up to the side of YP-3 and leaned in to assess the condition of its pilot, Captain Eddie, and to turn the engine off. Eddie had been struck in the neck and wasn't moving. Farley figured he was dead, and he and Burrows raced back to YP-13 under heavy fire. They were in the midst of chaos that even today no amount of planning or training can fully eliminate. Sergeant Billy Owens, who was shot in the shoulder, and First Lieutenant James Miguel, who was hit under the right armpit, were in bad shape on the floor of Yankee Papa 13. As Burrows documented the desperation in black and white, Farley and another crew member, Private First Class Wayne Hollian, worked feverishly to bandage their wounds. The following passage is from the feature that was published in Life magazine. What Burrows was capturing here wasn't unique to Vietnam. It's the human reality behind every conflict, no matter what the era. Not until YP-13 pulled away and out of range of enemy fire were Farley and Julian able to leave their guns and give medical attention to the 2 wounded men from YP-3. The co-pilot, First Lieutenant James Miguel, was in bad shape. When Farley and Julian eased off his flak vest, they exposed a major wound just below his armpit. Miguel's face registered pain, Burrows reported, and his lips moved slightly, but if he said anything, it was drowned out by the noise of the copter. He looked pale, and I wondered how long he could hold on. Farley began bandaging Miguel's wound. The wind from the doorway kept whipping the bandages across his face. Then blood started to come from his nose and his mouth, and a glazed look came into his eyes. Farley tried mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, but Miguel was dead. Nobody said a word. This is the part of war that doesn't show up in a strategy briefing or in the headlines, but it's the part that never changes. And then came the moment that would define the entire photo essay. Lance Corporal James Farley, just 21 years old, sat in the helicopter covered in blood, exhausted, and crying, having borne witness to the inescapable tragedy of war. An image that could just as easily be taken in a conflict zone today. What Burrows captured wasn't just combat. It was the full story of a mission, the objective, the units, the ambush, and the aftermath, which stays for a lifetime with those who had to live through it. This is a human reality that often gets lost in the way we see war today. This wasn't a famous battle, but it quite possibly was something far more important. When it was published in Life magazine, millions of people saw it. It challenged the idea that war was controlled or clean, which was the way it had almost always been presented in the past. It shocked people, and for some, it showed suffering through a sharper and more personal lens. Larry Burrows would continue to document the war in Vietnam for another 6 years, capturing not just its battles, but its human cost. It was 60 years ago this week when this mission unfolded over Vietnam, and yet what it reveals about war still feels immediate, because while the weapons have changed and the technology has advanced, the experience of the people inside these moments hasn't. In February 1971, Burrows was killed, along with fellow journalists Henri Huet, Kent Potter, and Kasiburo Shimamoto, when their helicopter was shot down over Laos. He was 44 years old. The images he left behind, especially those from Yankee Papa 13, still endure, not as history alone, but as a reminder of what war actually looks like, beyond the maps, the strategy, and the headlines. If you like this video, hit like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.